Hi, this is Chris Bennett at Tintri. Welcome to our inaugural webinar. We are thrilled to have Steve Duplessis with us this morning. I just wanted to briefly give you an idea of what's in store. So Steve's going to be speaking for a few minutes and lay out the issues that he sees from his perspective in terms of what's going on with virtualization and the impact it has on storage. Kieran, our CEO, is also here, and he will give a quick overview of our system and talk a little bit about some of the technology and the origins of that. And then actually we roped Pratik Wadhar, our Vice President of Engineering, in to give a live demo, actually of one of our production systems. And so we've just discovered that's the best way to give people an overview of how our system works, is to show you live. And we'll be taking questions in the question window during the entire session and saving them up and answering most of them at the end. We have a significant amount of time allotted for Q&A, so please send us those questions during the session, and we'll get to as many as we can during the session. So welcome. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Steve. So Steve, glad you're here. Why don't you kick us off?
Thank you, Chris, and thanks, everybody. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I appreciate the opportunity to chat at you, if not with you this morning. So I'm just going to take a few minutes and talk through some of the state of the virtualization world from an empirical perspective, and then we'll talk a little bit about it from a real-life perspective, and then we'll hand it over to Kieran and find out what Tintri is all about. So without telling you anything that you don't already know, virtualization is alive and well. As we're living and breathing each day to day, it just becomes more and more popular, more and more relevant out in data centers around the world, but it's not over yet. So it's really just begun. Virtualization is becoming ubiquitous technology, as you can read here, but it's still relatively immature from an overall landscape grab perspective. Furthermore, as you can see, and I'm not going to read all these slides to you smart folk, I'm assuming you can read, but the overwhelming majority still of mission-critical applications have not been virtualized, certainly not in a production environment. The construct of dynamic or liquid IT continues to be a marketing and a vision more than it is a reality. People are still very nascent in their overall server virtualization maturity, if you will. And so we talk about these things, but we're still blocking and tackling by and large. Most of the workloads, for example, that have been virtualized to date tend to be IT-specific workloads, file and print, things like that. What we are going to expect, though, and I'll show you in a second, is significant overall growth and maturity over the next 2 years. Challenges with virtualization: why aren't we already 100% ubiquitous? There's no one that's arguing any longer about the merits of virtualization in the data center. The only thing we can argue about is how do we get full-on virtualization within the data center. And what research tells us is that these are really the 4 core areas that are causing stall where stall exists. Probably most importantly, well, I don't know if it's most important, but certainly the one that hits you in the face really early on is that there's a distinct lack of skills when it comes to virtualization between functional IT organizations and groups. And so while historically we've been fine by and large with our roles as specialists within IT, virtualization crosses every single component on the horizontal landscape of IT, and as such, it forces our organizations to communicate more effectively together, to train more effectively together. And it's because of that that people have a lot of dynamics within their organizations that have to get worked through in order for us to keep on moving forward. As I said earlier, we're still in the nascent early on stages of full-on virtualization deployments, and because of that, there simply aren't a lot of best practices. It's not commonplace yet. There's still a lot of learning on the fly that's going on in organizations, and so because of that, people will stumble and have to slow down or go backwards and reset in order to move forwards again. Security risks are always a challenge within IT, but there's certainly a brand new highlighted challenge within the virtual environments because you can't see things in the virtual world. And performance, which again is also always a challenge in the physical world, becomes an incredible challenge in the virtual world for the same exact reasons. You can't see clearly as to what the cause and effect are in moving around virtual infrastructure and applications in that type of environment. Server virtualization is the single top priority in 2011 for SMEs all the way through large enterprises on a global basis. What we do know is that initial small successes tend to quickly build momentum within IT operations. And so what I mean by that really is try not to bite off more than you can chew. Making small, significant advancements quickly tends to get management and everybody else from the outside looking in on your side. We can expect enormous growth over the next couple of years in these environments. And massive industry showdown simply means that virtualization changes everything. It changes and forces change into all existing processes that occur, by and large, within the data center ultimately. And so because of that, incumbency, or doing things the way you did them, is probably not going to be the way you are going to do things in the future in a post-virtualization era, if you will. And because of that, there's a massive industry showdown because clearly existing incumbents have a lot to lose and new people with new ideas have an awful lot to gain. ESG as a company did an exhaustive global research project about 6 months ago at this point to try and categorize and segment the overall market by the maturity of server virtualization adoption. And we looked at things from 4 distinct perspectives. First, just basic level of what % of overall physical servers have been virtualized. Then secondarily, how many virtual machines were in existence per physical machine. That's the efficiency ratio we're looking at. Then how many of the virtual machines that you have are actually in production environments. And then finally, what types of workloads are executing on these virtual machines. And we categorized through those 4 lenses and through each distinct functional area within IT and came across a relatively simplistic methodology of categorizing the market in what we term laggards, followers, and leaders. And while you can read this at your leisure, and this is available throughout the industry at this particular point, the takeaway here is that overwhelmingly the majority of shops still represent within the I'm way behind stage or I'm following along stage. A mere 25% of the overall market would we categorize as leaders, and even those that we categorize as leaders still are not at the 90% virtualized as a general rule. They're still they're just higher and further along, and they're reaping more and more benefits as they progress, but they're still comparatively far below where they will be 24 months from now. In this data slide, all we're trying to show you is highlight how rapid, for all the hoopla that's existed in the market and all it's just been a buzz machine, the server virtualization market, for both industry and for the consumer. It really hasn't even begun. And what this highlights is that the growth rates are going to accelerate dramatically over the next 24 months as people move further and further down that spectrum to the right. Storage, because Tintri is a storage-specific company, I was asked to talk about the storage-specific challenges related to server virtualization. And as you can read here, while capital cost is always a concern irrespective of what the issue is, well, the important takeaways here is when it comes to storage and what the issues are involved around how are we going to progress our overall server virtualization strategies. Scalability problems, OpEx, and performance problems are the highest ranking issues that came forth. Scale, I think, makes a heck of a lot of sense, right? Traditional infrastructure that is monolithic is not by default sort of scale out as the new buzz or the new moniker is put in place there. And the reason that's an issue, quite frankly, is simply because we just don't know what the impact of our creating a virtual infrastructure is going to be when we move and munge and add workloads, migrate workloads, et cetera. We all of a sudden enable things to occur that previously were not enabled. And because of that, we don't understand yet, and I'm not sure we ever will, what the end of our overall scale requirements is going to be. Operating new storage infrastructure is always a challenge in the physical world, but it's more of a challenge, again, in the virtual world for the things we talked about previously, which are you can't see. You don't know. Your visibility is very limited. And what new skills do you have to possess, in order to operate these new environments effectively? And performance problems are, again, always have been a challenge, but even more of a challenge now, because while we can model what a single infrastructure stack with a single application executing on it will perform like, it's very difficult to model when we're moving things around, when we're altering workloads, when we're changing or adding workloads, when we're shifting workloads from certain physical assets to other physical assets. It becomes very difficult to understand how performance is going to be impacted at any given time. Storage-specific issues or factors that would enable more widespread use of server virtualization, first and foremost, additional training for IT staff. And what that simply is calling out is that storage professionals, while they tend to be really good at understanding their own specialty, have not yet been able to cross that chasm to understand what the virtualization specialties are involved in. That's not just true of storage, by the way. That shows up in all of the functional areas. Faster storage provisioning only goes to make sense. If the servers are now teaching the business units or they're educating the business unit that they can effectively provide instant-on server provisioning, the expectation is that storage is going to follow. And that is not, as we all know today, that's typically not the case. So while I can create a virtual machine in a matter of minutes, it still oftentimes takes days, weeks, or months to provision storage in the old school method to be able to get something that's physically up and running, and that has to change. More scalable storage infrastructure, we just talked about that, and increased use of storage virtualization. What people are finding as they're moving down the server virtualization path is that all the benefits or all the attributes associated to a virtual storage world, a virtual server world, are become mismatched and misaligned when we're talking about physical monolithic storage. So if a virtual machine can execute and move around all over the data center in a virtual server world, the data has to be able to actually move around with it. It does no good if you're moving a virtual machine from physical host A to physical host Z if the data is still stuck to physical host A, for example. So storage virtualization technologies, which arguably have been around even longer than server virtualization technologies, are suddenly becoming highlighted because you need to match those levels at every layer of the infrastructure. And then finally, virtualization's impact on storage management processes and technologies today. If you can see here, 38% of people surveyed said they want all or most of their critical storage management function to get out of storage altogether and roll up into the virtualization software platform itself. And that's a really big number. Secondarily, if you look at the second part of that, or the second biggest, 53% said it's going to have some impact. We're going to take some of the storage functionality, be it process or technology, that we leverage today, and we want it, some of it at least, moved into that virtual administrative layer, if you will, or orchestration layer. And that has big impact on storage folk as we know it and the way storage is managed today. As that moves, I think it's sort of, to whatever degree, very few people are saying we're not going to do anything. We're not going to change anything. We're not going to integrate into that virtualization layer at all. Very, very few. And those that are saying that are going to be unemployed eventually, so I suggest you don't do that. But to some degree, sometimes great and sometimes minor, but to some degree, storage process, storage function is going to move, at least to the very least, integrate much more heavily into the virtualization layer, and if not entirely move into that virtualization layer. And so with that, I appreciate your taking the time to listen to me ramble. I'm going to hand it back over to Kieran at this point to introduce Tintri and some of the things that they've got going on. Kieran?
Thanks very much, Steve. This is Kieran Hardy here. I'm CEO and co-founder of Tintri. So in terms of my background, I ran all of R&D at VMware for about 7 years. So my team delivered the flagship products, the first and subsequent versions of ESX Server and Virtual Center. So one of the big things that I saw at VMware was that customers were getting a lot of benefits from virtualization on the server side, but it was a very, very different story on the storage side. So specifically, and Steve alluded to a lot of this, the storage for virtualized environments is complex and it's expensive. And the other thing, and you see this a lot with customers, is that there are typically applications that they can't virtualize because of storage performance, cost, and complexity. Things like databases are often not virtualized for that reason. So there were two things that drove me to found Tintri. The first was that virtualization has now become pervasive. And one of the things Paul Moritz observed at the last VMworld was that in 2009, the number of virtual machines for the first time exceeded the number of physical machines being deployed. So virtualization is absolutely mainstream. The other thing, and this is that really enabled a startup to enter this space, is that there's a set of technology changes that made a completely new approach to storage possible. So specifically, flash memory has become available over the last few years. 10 gigabit Ethernet is now economic. And you also have very powerful multi-core processors that make it feasible to do things like compression, deduplication that are compute intensive. So we wanted to solve the problem of storage for virtualized environments, and to do that, we put together a very top-tier team. So we have folks from VMware, from Citrix on the virtualization side, and then from EMC, Data Domain, NetApp, Brocade on the storage side. So we have a unique mixture of folks with virtualization and storage backgrounds. So I'm going to show you a demo, or Pratik will show you a demo in a little while, but I just want to explain what we're doing, and it's conceptually very, very simple. We built a storage system that is exclusively for virtual machines. So it is not general purpose storage. It doesn't include the traditional concepts like LUNs, volumes, tiering, zoning, RAID groups. And rather than that, it presents something in a way that's very, very familiar to virtualization administrators. So the concepts of virtual machines and virtual disks. You'll see this very clearly in the demo. And in order to use a Tintri product, so Tintri VM Store is our first product, you do not require specialized storage knowledge, but you have access to very powerful storage. And so what we've done is we built a from-the-ground-up file system that makes use of flash and SATA drives. We use a lot of very sophisticated techniques to deal with the idiosyncrasies of flash. And it's not a general-purpose file system. It's exclusively for virtual machines. And so it's not just a simple system, it's also a system that is very fast. So our performance is equivalent to a high-end storage array that has a few hundred spindles. So one of the things, and this is a very critical point, and you'll see it in the demo, is we're the first storage system to be virtual machine aware. And the storage system actually understands virtual machines, and the virtual machine and virtual disk are the fundamental units of administration. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Pratik Water, our VP of Engineering, and he will show you the demo of Tintri VM Store. This is a live demo of our production system. Pratik.
Thank you, Kieran, and hello, everyone. So what I'm going to be doing right now is showing you an overview of the Tintri production system. This is actually one of our systems internally that we use for a variety of purposes, including running our build and test automation servers. It's running some infrastructure applications for us, as well as a host of desktop VMs that are used for development and for general use inside the company. So what you are seeing right now is of course a slideshow that's been presented. It is currently running on a Windows 7 VM, and that is hosted on a Tintri appliance. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how the Tintri Datastore appears on vCenter or the vSphere client. So you should be seeing, looking at the vSphere client right now, and just going to maximize it so you can see everything. Clicking on the Datastore object, you see a list of data stores that are currently hosted on this particular vCenter. The Tintri Datastore appears as a NAS data store, and with a total capacity of 8.5 terabytes, or about 8 terabytes in decimal. What's interesting is you see that the provision space on this particular data store is about 10 terabytes or 9.87 terabytes. Nothing special here. For all intents and purposes, it appears as a single NFS or NAS data store. And the next thing I'm going to do now is show you what you can see on our dashboard. So you see the Tintri tab here. I'm going to click on it. And what you're now looking at is the dashboard for the Tintri VM Store appliance. The dashboard comprises 3 sections and is designed to answer 3 basic questions. 1, how is my system doing overall? 2, how much headroom is available? And 3, which VMs are busier than usual? Okay. So first, looking at the top left-hand section here, you see the 4 key metrics that we are displaying for the particular data store. You see IOPS, throughput, latency, and the flash hit ratio. The IOPS, as you see on this box, we're doing about 4,000 IOPS. Most of it are actually coming from one of our test VMs that continually pounds the system. What you can also see is the range over the last 7 days. In this particular case, this appliance is seen on the range of 2,000 to about 32,000 IOPS. The flash hit ratio is a measure of how much of your IOs are actually coming from flash versus the disk. In this case, you see that 100% of the IOs are being serviced out of flash. This particular data store has about 50 VMs currently running on it. So that gives you an overall view of the data store as a whole. Clicking on any of these metrics will take you to a graphical representation of the data store. And you can see where the peaks were, what was happening on the system. You can scroll back over 7 days to see how the data store was doing. Okay. Going back to the dashboard, there are 2 fuel gauges that you see on the left-hand section, the bottom left-hand section. The bottom fuel gauge is very common. It shows you the space consumed. And it's pretty much in line with what you see on a traditional storage system. Right? The other gauge shows space consumed by live data, snapshots, and what is available. The top gauge is unique to Tintri. It shows you how much performance headroom is available on the data store. This number is calculated from a proprietary set of algorithms that measure VM performance over a multi-hour window, and include, among other things, the working set of the VM, throughput, flash usage, and disk I/O utilization. The right-hand side shows you which VMs are busier than usual from 2 perspectives, from a space perspective and from a performance perspective. So most VM administrators know their largest and busiest VMs. And what is interesting when troubleshooting issues is the list of unusually busy VMs or the list of VMs growing exceptionally fast. The right section on the dashboard displays exactly this. So the top list here shows you the list of VMs that have seen an increase in performance or a spike in I/O activity from their norm. The bottom list shows you the list of VMs that have seen an increase in the amount of space consumed, over the last 7 days. So that in a nutshell is what you can see on the main dashboard of the Tintri appliance. Kieran?
Thanks very much, Pratik. So, Steve, do you have any questions based on just showing the overview of the demo?
I have a lot of questions. Thanks for asking. First one, ready? One of the most common problems that VM administrators face is figuring out if they have enough storage capacity and performance available to continue adding on more and more VMs. How do I figure out in your system if I can add more?
Actually, Steve, that is probably the easiest one for me to answer. So if you look at the two fuel gauges right now, we talked about how much performance and how much space, capacity is being consumed right now on this system. The bottom line is, if you see a green on the performance reserves fuel gauge and you see a green on the space reserves fuel gauge, you can continue adding VMs. It's pretty much as simple as that.
So, Steve, does that answer your question?
Well, it does, and that looks easy enough for even me to be able to do it. But what about when we're trying to diagnose a performance problem, or if I'm having a performance problem on a particular VM, it normally is impossible, if not, it's at least really hard to diagnose. How are you going to help me there?
Okay, so there's a couple of ways to do this. So the easiest way right now would be for you to look at the right-hand section and see if this particular VM that you're looking at is seen here. And if you notice that it is listed here, then you're potentially seeing an unusual activity on that VM that's out of the norm. Or what you can do is, you could click on the Find VM button here, and it'll take you to a list of virtual machines that are currently being serviced out of this particular data store. I'll quickly jump back, because if you look at the virtual machine tab, this is vCenter we're looking at, you can see that these are the same VMs that are displayed here as they are displayed on the Tintri list. So the namespace we're using is essentially the vCenter namespace. Okay. Now, let's say you want to troubleshoot a VM. In our case, let's actually pick a VM that I know usually sees a lot of I/O. So in this case, it's our test VM. I could actually look for it by name here, or since I know that it usually does a lot of IOPS, I can select the IOPS column and sort by IOPS. Now if I go to the top, you should be able to see that it's this particular VM that's currently doing about 4,600 IOPS. If you double click on it, you're now presented with essentially the key metrics that we had outlined earlier, but now being shown on a VM basis. So in this particular case, you can look at the IOPS that are coming out for this particular VM. You can scroll back over 7 days. You can look at the throughput this VM was seeing, performance reserves that it's consuming over time, latency, how much of it are being serviced out of flash, okay, and how much capacity is being consumed. You can see that at a VM level, or I can click on the virtual disk tab, and now you see the same things, the same metrics that you were observing, but being shown at a vDisk level. In this particular case, this VM consists of 5 vDisks. There are 4 data disks here, and then there's 1 swap disk here. You can select either of them, right? Or you can combine 2 of them, and actually it'll show you, the combined graph at the bottom for each particular vDisk. So that's one way you can start troubleshooting, particular vDisks and particular VMs, and seeing if there are any issues with the VM. Does that answer it?
It does, and more. It does and more. Thank you. All right, I'm going to change gears on you just for a minute, see if we can mix you up a little bit. In the storage world, efficiency or effective usage, et cetera, and performance are almost always at odds. And since performance is the thing that makes the phone ring, or lack thereof tends to be the thing that makes the phone ring, in order to get predictable performance out of virtual machines, customers today are typically either over-provisioning the amount of spindles that they have associated with, and or they're over-provisioning the amount of expensive flash just to be able to make sure they can get predictable performance levels. And so when you do that, by default, you tend to be massively inefficient because you're not using all this stuff properly at the right place at the right time when you need it. And so how is this system going to be different in that regards, or is it?
So the approach, this is Kieran here, so we've done a lot of very sophisticated things to deal with the efficiency issue. So as you observed, Steve, Flash is expensive, so you can't afford to have everything that's sitting in Flash, but it is performant. So we expand the logical size of Flash that you're using by doing compression, by doing inline compression, by doing inline deduplication. And we also do calculations on how much Flash a particular virtual machine needs. So essentially it's working set. We also make sure that snapshots are not occupying Flash. They can be stored on SATA disks. And Pratik will also show you how we make sure that critical applications are stored in Flash if you really want to make sure that you have quality of service for a specific application. So Pratik, why don't you go through that?
Sure. Actually, before I do that, Kieran, some of you, I think, are wondering what happened in this particular gap here. So what I can tell you is that yesterday we had a little bit of a glitch on one of our ESX servers, and we had to take this VM down. So it was doing no I/O for that little period of time, and then it came back up and started operating. So going back to what Kieran was talking about, if you look at the performance fuel gauge, you see three sections. You see one section which says pinned, auto-allocated, and then how much is available, performance is available. On a typical system, when you put VMs on it, on our system, we auto-allocate how much performance reserves are given to that particular VM. However, if you have a business-critical VM, or say that you have a temporary fix that you want to apply to a particular VM, you can actually pin that particular VM or that vDisk. And at that point, all the IOs for that vDisk or that VM will be serviced out of Flash. So it'll be a first-class citizen in Flash, and will get the best performance possible. The ways to do that is you could essentially pick a VM and just say pin it, or you could even go down to a particular vDisk, right, and then pick a vDisk and pin the vDisk. So for example, if you wanted to say, this VM is important to me, I'll make sure that when it swaps, everything comes out of Flash. You could pick this little vDisk here, click on the pin button, and the VM is now pinned, and everything for that particular vDisk is now being serviced out of Flash. There's not a lot of times that you want to be doing this, because most of the times the auto allocation works pretty well. So think of this as a safety valve and an override. Thanks, Kieran.
So Steve, you have another question?
Yeah, I have one more, and then I promise I'll shut up and we can get to other people's questions.
You promise, Steve?
I promise. I promise. Okay, so I talked earlier, and the research all backs me on this, that irrespective of the functional area, whether it's networking or servers or storage, for example, that we keep adding layers and layers of complexity as we add virtual abstraction. And so it comes back to us in the form of, do I have to be a PhD or go learn a whole new language in order to make any of this stuff work in a virtual world? And so if you're a storage admin, what's this system going to look like? Or if you're a virtualization admin, what is storage going to look like? What is your system going to do to help bridge that language barrier, for lack of a better term?
So one of the things that's actually very important, and you've seen this in the demo, is what you don't see in our product, right? So there are no LUNs, there are no volumes, there is no tiering, even though we have multiple levels of storage. You do not see RAID groups. You don't see all the arcane concepts of storage. So this is something that is absolutely designed for virtualization administrators. It's designed for people that do not have specialized storage knowledge. And as we've observed earlier, it's VM aware. So it's virtual machine aware. So you've seen We do quality of service at a virtual machine or vDisk level. You've also seen that we do performance statistics at a virtual machine granularity. And we also snapshot at a virtual machine granularity. And in the future, we'll support replication at a VM level. So very simple and VM aware. So I'm going to open it up now for a set of questions.
Yeah, so we've had, this is Chris, so we've had lots of questions coming in, and we will, there's no chance we're going to get to them all, so that's great, but we will get to as many of them as we can. But please feel free to keep sending them in, and we'll sift through them. One of the things,
so Chris,
one of the questions,
I'm sorry, Chris, yeah, I totally lied. Kieran just spawned another question while he was talking, so I'm going to take control.
Go for it, Steve.
But I promise this is the last one. So, Kieran, you talked about tiering. Today, everybody's kind of got a story, and rightfully so, around intelligent tiering and claiming to be able to optimize or self-optimize it, specifically when it comes to storage around VMs. So it's really confusing for the average person because I do this for a living, and it's confusing to me. What is unique, or how can you help explain how your ability to make sure things are in the right place at the right time is different than everybody else's?
Okay, so the first thing is that this is not an existing file system that we're built on. It's a file system that is designed for virtual machines and virtual disks. And so the design point is very different. So traditional file systems are designed for hundreds of thousands or millions of files. Our system is designed for thousands of virtual machine, virtual disk files. And there's information that we can associate with virtual machines and virtual disks that are just not feasible within a conventional file system. And as you've seen, the file system understands virtual machines and virtual disks. So you can pin at that level. You can also perform snapshots at that level. In terms of the tiering, we're able to take advantage of the fact that there's a lot of redundancy in virtual machines, so that we can do inline deduplication and compression. And unlike file systems that were designed back in the 90s, which is what a lot of the market has today, we're making very, very aggressive use of the processing power that's available so that we can make very, very efficient use of flash. We're also, in our management of the tiering, we're able to use information about the virtual machines so that we can calculate working sets that are associated with a particular application. So essentially, it's the combination of the virtual machine aware file system and linking that to the management of flash and disk.
Okay, cool. Steve, did that answer your question?
That did, and now I promised I will shut up.
Promise. All right. You're good for that. Okay, cool. So there are a bunch of questions coming in. Many of them, let's start with the ones that I think would be good to start up front. There are questions, and I guess for Kieran or Pratik, whichever one of you want to take this, questions about the connectivity. We talk about one node being one data store. How does that relate to ESX hosts? You know, it seems like, 8 terabytes isn't very much. Is this sort of an SMB product? Talk about performance. Give some visibility to how this thing scales. And
yeah, so this is, first of all, this is a product that appears within vCenter as an NFS data store. So it's a single NFS data store. The 8.5 terabytes is actually usable terabytes. So that includes the RAID overhead. And based on what we've seen for customers, you often, for typical virtual machine sizes of 20, 30, 40 gigabytes, you can store between 100 and 200 virtual machines on a single node. Now, the very cool thing is that you can also scale these things by adding additional data stores. So VMware already has a model in which you can move virtual machines between data stores. We today Each data store needs to be managed separately, but in the future we'll provide single pane of glass management for multiple data stores.
Okay, cool. One of the other questions came in about pricing. So let's do that.
So the pricing for the product is $65,000 is the price for a node.
Okay, cool. And Pratik, this is probably good for you. So a couple people have noticed that the capacity fuel gauge lists 124% provisioned. So what exactly does that mean?
Okay, so for those of you that are VM administrators, you do know that when you are thin provisioned, it's very easy to keep adding stuff and then find out that you are, over provisioned. In our case, sadly to say, that is exactly what's happened. Our developers and everyone here keeps adding VMs. So we are over provisioned. With thin provision, you see we're using about 9.87 terabytes right now on this appliance. When you go to the appliance, you do see that it is thin provision. So what's actually written is about 5.2 terabytes right here. But the system is telling you that, hey, if everything decided to suddenly write, then you would be over provisioned right now. One thing I'd like to highlight while we're on this is even though we're using about 5.2 terabytes of space, what you see here is that all your IOs for your VMs are still being serviced out of flash. And that's a result of the inline dedupe and compression that we have, as well as the algorithms that we deploy to keep everything that's needed for a VM to operate in flash. Hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I think so. So there are a couple questions about the file system as well, specifically whether or not it's, is it really ground up? Is it based on ZFS? What's the story there?
So it's completely ground up, and just to understand what's different about it, again, it's a file system that's designed exclusively for virtual machine. It's also designed to store data on flash, so that it's not just a caching system, and nor is it a tier 0 system. We will store data on flash, and without sending it to disk in some cases, in most cases.
Okay.
So it's ground up, not based on existing file system.
Okay. And Pratik, there are some questions about just the physical connectivity. Oddly enough, all this virtual stuff, people actually do care about the physical stuff too. So connectivity, what's in it, redundancy, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So the appliance is essentially a 4-year appliance. It has 2 gig ports at the back end, and then 10 gig ports at the back. Both of them act as failover pairs. So the 2 gig ports act as a failover pair, and they're used for management administration. The 10 gig ports are used for data. Both ports again act as a failover pair right out of the gate, so there's no additional configuration needed, and essentially connected over NFS. So ESX to ESX appears as a regular NFS data store. In terms of the box, it has redundant power supplies, redundant fans. The disk drives, the SSDs and disks are also RAID 6.
Yeah, I mean both the hard drives and the SSDs are each RAID 6.
Correct.
All right, cool. The other thing, let me see. One of the other questions we've been getting is, so do we support? So far, we've only talked about VMware. Do we support other hypervisors?
So the system has been designed up front to be hypervisor agnostic, and so VMware has the majority of the market today. And there are other hypervisors out there. The next hypervisor that we support will be dictated by customer demand. So if you were actively soliciting feedback to see which would be the next hypervisor that we would support, so we'd love to hear and get your input on that.
Okay, cool, good. One other question about the connectivity. So there are a bunch of questions coming in about capacity and whether we support expansion shelves and how many different configurations we support. So either one of you guys.
So The philosophy that we had on this was very much around simplicity, and so the model for scaling the system is to add additional nodes. So the system is configured with 8 flash drives and 16 SATA drives, and that's the unit of scaling. So no shelves. We think shelves introduce complexity.
Okay. All right. Good. Let me see what I'm trying to keep up with all this stuff. So let's talk about replication. There are a bunch of questions that come out about replication. I know you briefly alluded to it, so anything more there? It sounds like it's just coming, and I guess we'll have to wait for future announcements on that.
Yeah, so replication, so again, we do operate on a virtual machine granularity and virtual disk granularity. So we will, with the next release of Site Recovery Manager, host-based replication, which doesn't require involvement of the array, will of course be supported. We are talking to customers right now to get their requirements for exactly what we're going to do on the replication side. One thing to note here is we are not going to simply follow the volume-based or LUN-based replication that's in the market. We are going to do something that is specific to virtual machines, and we're actively soliciting input in that area right now.
Okay. And there are a bunch of questions about backup, and can I back individual VMs? I mean, how does that work?
So backup, the mechanisms that we support for backup, we of course support the VMware APIs for data protection. The most common ways that people do backup are to use those kind of mechanisms, or to actually back up within the virtual machine itself, and that's how we would expect that people would do backup. So the same way that you're doing backup in your virtual machines today.
Okay. And then there are also a bunch of questions about snapshots, how they work. I don't know, Pratik, why don't you talk about snapshots, how they work, how people would use them, granularity, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so snapshots are, you can do them at the VM level, as explained earlier today. And they're available on the system. You can see here that we have snapshots that are currently available. You can take them anytime you want. They're pretty fast to take. Once they're taken, you can then essentially instantiate a snapshot, import it back into vCenter, and power up the VM.
So does taking a snapshot, I mean, does that have a performance impact?
Nope.
Okay. All right, cool. And let me see, there are some questions about how we're connected to the ESX hosts. So
that, I mean, we're connected to ESX host. It's an NFS Datastore, so it's IP, and we would recommend that you use 10 gigabit, but we support gigabit as well.
Okay. And there are a bunch of folks from, it looks like from EMEA online, and so the question is, do we offer availability? So we're offering availability in the US. How about in EMEA?
So we're currently selling in the U.S. only, but we expect that in the second half of this year, we expect to go into EMEA, and we will be recruiting channel partners in EMEA at that time.
Okay. Let me see. So, so one of the questions, it was related to snapshots, is so how many snapshots can you keep for any individual VM, or vDisk for that matter, I guess?
There's no particular limit. You can take as many snapshots as you want, but ultimately you'll start using up space over time. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
And you need to manage snapshots. So.
Okay. All right. Cool. So there are some questions about redundancy and availability.
Okay, so just to reiterate what we have, so as part of the system, there are redundant power supplies, there are redundant fans, redundant NICs. As Pratik mentioned earlier, we have RAID 6 on the disk. We also have RAID 6 on flash. And one of the things when we were talking to customers, and we were very careful in defining the first version of the product to add the right set of features, the two things that were very important were a rock-solid file system, and they also wanted to be able to support non-disruptive upgrades so that you did not have to bring down virtual machines when you upgraded the software on one of our arrays. And so we support non-disruptive upgrades of the software on the when it's connected to Tintri VM Store. There is a restriction in the first release of the product. We have a single controller, but we will remove that restriction in our next release.
Okay, cool. And there are some questions about, there are more questions about the software upgrade. I just would comment, so I guess I'll ask myself a question, but make a comment. One of our early customers is a VMware only admin, and actually it's not a storage admin, and has actually been able to upgrade the system software 3 times without any involvement at all. It's a very straightforward process. So there are more questions about performance. People are really interested in the fuel gauge, what's going on behind the scenes. How is this sucker really as fast as it seems? Maybe you could talk about some of the workloads that we've hammered this thing with, or the customers have hammered it with, and what kind of throughput you can expect to see.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll talk about this particular one that we're using right now. What you do see is it's an internal production system. It's used for most of our infrastructure, right? So as I mentioned, all our development build servers are running off this. All our automation test harnesses are running off this. And then our developers are using desktop VMs to do development on. So it's a pretty standard use case that we've seen from a number of our customers. We have seen the system do up to about 50,000 IOPS, on a mixed read-write basis. And other use cases that we've seen customers deployed on are databases. We've had 2 customers that have deployed, an Oracle database and a SQL Server database or a MySQL database. So a variety of workloads, and you can get the performance that you need. We haven't really seen performance as an issue in most of our customer use cases.
Actually, any.
Yeah. I mean, I think the box is pretty powerful enough that not one of our customers has managed to at least reach the limits in the applications that they have deployed yet.
But one of the things that's important here is just having the performance available to you really simplifies your life. You don't have to go through a lot of the pain that you have in traditional storage of dealing with the performance of spindles.
Okay, cool. So we got time for, I think, 1 or 2 more questions. Let's talk about VMware's compatibility list. So are we on? I checked the website. It's not on the website.
It will be. Actually, we have just been certified, and we will be on the HCL later this week. I just noticed that we are now listed as an official partner.
Oh, cool.
Storage product. So expect to see at least the updated HCL later this week.
All right, great.
And we will be on it.
Good. And then how about link clones? So storing link clones.
Yeah, so we do support link clones. This is something that is used by VMware View, and so that is supported.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, with that, we're running up against the top of the hour. Do we have time for another question? What do you think? Sharon, out the list you see, is there something else you want to answer?
So actually, there's a question about auto support. Do we have auto support? And yes, there is auto support for the product, and that sends nightlies that give data on the nodes, and also will send alerts. One of the things I would highlight here is there's a white paper on the website that goes into a bit more technical detail. So if you find that some of the questions that are being asked here are addressed in the white paper.
Okay, good. And one other one, as I was scanning through the list here, it's quite a long list now, is VAI. So what's the sort of VAI?
So VAI is a feature that's supported today only for block level storage, but VMware will support it for NFS in the next release, and we will absolutely support VAI when it's supported for NFS.
All right, excellent. All right, well, good. Well, I want to respect everybody's times, respect everyone's time, and end on time. So thank you for your participation. It's been great. Steve, thank you for joining us. You're entertaining as always. And Kieran noted the white paper. That's good. This will be recorded and posted on our website shortly. We look forward to your questions and the opportunity to do business with many of you. And with that, I'll sign off. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you. Thank you.